Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East today as tensions rise far beyond Israel. More players now inserting themselves in the fight, making the threat of an expanding war even greater. Blinken arrived in Istanbul, marking his fourth trip now to the Middle East since the deadly Hamas attack on Israel. And his visit comes amid a week of heightened violence in the region. First, Israeli drone strike that killed a top Hamas official in Beirut, Lebanon. And then also this week, the U.S. military confirming it carried out its own airstrike in Baghdad, killing an Iran-backed militia leader responsible for recent attacks on U.S. personnel. And then adding to the bloodshed, the Islamic State claiming responsibility for two deadly bombings near the burial site of slain military commander Qasem Soleimani in Iran. Now, not to mention, there's the ongoing clashes between U.S. forces and Houthi rebels out there in the Red Sea. Senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez and our foreign correspondent Marcus Moore, who's in Tel Aviv, join me now to talk a little more about this. So, Louis, is Secretary Blinken going to make a difference here? It's his fourth visit since the attack on October 7th. The conflict is clearly spreading. Is his diplomacy just ineffective here?
Kira, I think the effort here is to maintain the diplomatic lead because the United States wants to ensure that the protection of Palestinian civilians, as Israel continues with its major offensive inside of Gaza, the United States wants to ensure the flow of humanitarian aid to the residents of Gaza. The United States wants to ensure the return of Israeli hostages from Hamas. And so the United States wants to maintain the lead of diplomatic engagement. And that's why this is his fourth trip to the region. His previous engagements it's been mixed bag, essentially, because the United States has been pushing for these humanitarian pauses. They don't want to go forward with the broader term of a ceasefire because they say it plays into the hands of Hamas. But that playing into that also means that the United States is losing support internationally as Israel plays with this continued tough hand inside of Israel. So I think the United States needs to, as we're seeing here with Blinken's trip, they're maintaining that diplomatic effort, at the same time trying to maintain support for what they see as Israel's right of self-defense.
So Marcus, Blinken is asking for more humanitarian aid. He's always been pushing for more aid to get into Gaza. Has he been able to get any more in?
Well, today there was some success, if you will, in terms of getting aid in. There were more than 180 aid trucks that made it into Gaza today. If you recall, in the immediate aftermath of the October 7th attacks, there was no aid whatsoever going in, and then that number gradually increased to about 100 aid trucks going in. But it's important to keep in mind that before the October 7th attacks, about 500 aid trucks were going in and out of Gaza every single day. So even at the more than 180 that made it in, there is still the need. And by all accounts, we have heard of a humanitarian crisis that has continued to unfold there, with families, adults, parents going without food so that their children can eat. So a desperate situation unfolding in the midst of this very critical military operation that has now reached 90 days about in the region there, with, as you mentioned, the concern that the conflict we watch unfold in Gaza could then spill over into a much wider conflict in northern Israel and in other parts of the region.
Well, Louis, the U.S. is calling yesterday's airstrike in Iraq a retaliatory strike for recent attacks on U.S. military bases. Was this the right time, you think, to carry out this attack?
Kira, one thing you always hear from the Pentagon is that the United States will carry out self-defense strikes at a time and place of their choosing. So this was the time and place yesterday. The location was deep inside of Baghdad, which is a very rare location for the United States to carry out a strike, and particularly such a senior leader of one of these two militias that the United States says are backed by Iran and that are launching Iranian-made missiles and drones at American military bases to the tune of 120 attacks since mid-October. That's resulted in 74 injuries among American forces. All of them have gone back to duty except for one. So the United States is trying to send this message. This is the sixth retaliatory strike against these Iranian-backed militias inside of Iraq and Syria. The United States trying to get the message to these groups to stop doing these attacks. And so, but in this case, this was a very precise drone strike targeting a leader of one of these two militias. It sends a very strong message.
All right, Louis, Marcus, appreciate it. Thank you. And for more, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh joins me now. Sabrina, glad you could join us. You know, the Pentagon called yesterday's airstrike in Baghdad necessary and proportionate. but it's being seen as an escalation now because of the rarity of carrying out an airstrike like this in Baghdad. So couldn't this backfire and give Iran-backed groups more incentive to attack our forces now?
Well, thanks again for having me on today. Look, we've always said this from the very beginning, and it doesn't just pertain to what's happening in the Middle East, but all around the world. We always reserve the right to protect our forces, to protect our people wherever they are stationed. And yesterday, what you saw the U.S. military do is take precise action against a known terrorist leader that has been one of the orchestrators of attacks against our forces in Iraq and Syria, who, by the way, are there to complete and to continue the defeat ISIS mission. And so the attacks on our forces in Iraq and Syria distract from that mission, distract from our partnerships with those governments, with their military forces to defeat ISIS. And so that's why you saw the U.S. military take the action that we did yesterday and target one specific individual with a known terrorist connection, a known terrorist network that has been conducting these attacks on our forces.
Understood, but I'm looking at this interview here where Iraqi's prime minister actually announced it's now forming this committee to prepare to close down the U.S.-led international coalition's mission in that country, in Iraq, following this U.S. strike against a militia leader blamed for these attacks against U.S. troops. So what if this does lead to Iraq's government, pushing our troops out? Is this what the U.S. is actually hoping for?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate on what could happen in the future. What I can tell you now is that our forces are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government. We continue to have a good relationship with the government of Iraq. We're there in partnership with them in our mission to defeat ISIS. That is the mission of not only U.S. forces, but that is something that Iraq wants to see as well. So I'm not going to speculate on what might happen in the future. I can just tell you what I can tell you right now is that what our mission is, and that we are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government.
Well, if that invitation is rescinded, which it sounds like that may happen, it coincides with what General Kenneth McKenzie is saying now, too, who commanded CENTCOM, as you know. He wrote this op-ed today for the Wall Street Journal, and he said that if avoiding escalation here is the highest priority, then it's only logical to withdraw U.S. forces from the region, so that would fall in line with if Iraq booted troops out. But he also says that that would ultimately endanger the future of the Middle East, sending a dangerous signal to our adversaries as well as our friends and allies. So what's it going to be? And are you concerned that the Prime Minister of Iraq will rescind that invitation to have troops there, and then it could turn into a bigger mess than what we're seeing now?
Well, of course, we don't want to see any type of regional conflict. What you have with our forces in Iraq and Syria is exactly what you stated. Their mission, their goal is to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS. And we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of, just a few years ago when ISIS was kilometers away from taking control of Baghdad. ISIS just the other day claimed responsibility for an attack in Iran. So this is exactly what we don't want to see. We don't want to see a resurgence of ISIS in the region. And frankly, neither do some of the governments that we partner with or their militaries want to see a resurgence of ISIS. We know the damage that they're capable of doing. That's why we are there in Iraq and Syria, to work with their militaries, to work with their government, to ensure that ISIS cannot come back to the capacity that it was once at. Again, I'm not going to speculate on what the future might hold. What I can tell you is that we have a good relationship with the government of Iraq. I've seen the statements. Again, we are in Iraq at the invitation of the government, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh, appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.